Co-authored research with Salih, which is going to be published soon, hopefully, at an academic journal. So I agree with the previous presenter. We also sort of look into Tunisia and see it through the lens of institutions, basically, and how institutions matter in democratization. But there is one particular institution that we focused on, which is the party system. And we sort of try to, because there is sort of an agreement in the literature and political science that parties constitute a key sort of actors and key sort of institutions in maintaining a democratic regime. But despite that, there is sort of the findings that in many sort of new democracies, party systems cannot institutionalize sufficiently. That is to say that there is not sort of this reaching to a stable partisan competition in which there's a clear governing party and an opposition and these alternate. And then, so the system cannot institutionalize easily. So what we're questioning here is that how does it work? Like what factors explain the persistence of weakly institutionalized political party system in some new democracies in ways that can hamper the democratization process, whereas in others, the party system do manage to institutionalize. And we'll look at the case study of Tunisia, and we conduct a research in Tunisia after actually President Kais Saied's takeover, in the initial months following this takeover, with political party leaders from political parties across different political ideologies and trends. But there is one sort of key theoretical thing that we look at through is that the concept of historical institutionalism, which basically looks at the foundation of institutions historically and their long-lasting effects, and looks at the key moments in history called critical junctures, and how these key moments give the actors the chance to redesign the institutions. And we look at how the weight of history and the new institutions designed after 2011 sort of affect overall the partisan system in Tunisia. Right? So the sort of overwhelming argument is that in many cases, where if you had a strong party under the authoritarian regime, this strong parties actually translate into a more stable partisan competition after democratization as well. But Tunisia actually didn't work that way, because Ben Ali's Tunisia had a very strong political party, RCD, with close to 2 million members, with a lot of linkages in society, bureaus everywhere, a really strong party, as opposed to actually Mubarak's party in Egypt, for instance. And there is also the overwhelming argument is that civil society is good for democracy, that if you have sort of actively functioning civil society actors, be it NGOs, be it unions, all these things, they also help sort of democracy prosper. This is a very common sort of argument in the theory of democratization. And sort of in our argument, we're going to see that these two necessarily don't really fit into Tunisia. And we'll explain why. But before I pass it to Salih, so there's four things. When I mean a stable partisan competition, this generally means stable rules and competition. So the stable rules in terms of the party laws, in terms of electoral laws, but also stable social rules for the parties, that parties are able to connect with certain parts of the electorate, of the population, and then maintain this stable basis, and also maintain some sort of unity within their parties, and that they're perceived as legitimate. The electoral system and the parties are considered to be legitimate, and they have strong organizations, sort of in terms of how they function. In Tunisia, actually, we don't see any of these, unfortunately, during the 10 years of the democratization process, despite democratization being a reality, because you had obviously changes, which is normal after a new constitution is made. But the thing is, you had the electoral turnout, which was at 67% in 2014, going down to 41%, 42% in 2019. That's how Kais Saied was elected also, which means there is really a question of legitimacy here. And then we also calculated an index of what's called electoral volatility that captures how sort of the parties that were elected into parliament and how that sort of changed over time from one election to the other. When we see that 46% changed in 2014 compared to 2011, and then 55% changed in 2019 compared to 2014. This is double the numbers in Eastern Europe, which are considered to be unstable partisan regimes. And also what's called party-nomism is like MPs leaving one party to move to other is also a very common occurrence in Tunisia for 10 years after the revolution. And here is a very quick thing, the image that I think captures this is that the first image you see here, Hizb al-Democratic, was authoritarian party in Tunisia. You see their headquarters, how fenced it is. It's the Tour de la Nation, I think, right now. And here you see the largest party in Tunisia, Ennahda, which still has some sort of a building, right? But it's nothing compared to the party that was in power And then here you see the third largest party in the parliament of 2019, Tayar Democratic. Their office is just one floor in a building. Like you can see the weakness of political parties in Tunisia, with the exception of Ennahda to some extent after the revolution. So, and then here I've just put the numbers of electoral changes. I will skip this through, but you can see that the largest party in 2014, this is I think the most striking case, went from having NIDA, from 86 seats in the parliament in 2014 to only 3 seats in 2019. This shows you like how unstable the competition was. So we used our researches, and I think, so historically I think Tunisia, as I said, I talked about this, so we think that 2011 was a critical juncture that sort of had the potential to alter this. And this is how I pass to Salih, who will sort of briefly finish up with the rest.
So, good afternoon, everyone. So I will pick up from where my colleague left. We will focus on 2 main factors here. One is the role of authoritarian successor parties. These are parties that inherit the networks of the prior authoritarian regime. Second one is the role of civil society, particularly UJTT. First of all, brief historical background. Leading up to the revolution, you had hegemonic party structure that relied on extensive clientele mechanisms, and UJTT, the main labor union, remained relatively autonomous in comparison to its counterparts in the region. Opposition parties were weak, and Islamist Ennahda was persecuted. Amidst the environment, 2011 revolution came, which we define as a critical juncture to restructure the country's institutions. However, the decisions that founders took, such as setting up an electoral system that was very generous towards small parties and which encouraged then splinter movements, a weak financial law that did not provide support for political parties and kept them dependent on business people, and a semi-presidential system where presidents had to leave parties would further weaken the structure. As the RCD or authoritarian party was banned, it could not initially activate its networks leading up to the initial elections. The Troika government created an uneven system dominated by Ennahda, the largest Islamist party, whereas the UJTT or the union remained as the only capable oppositional force. Parties failed to become programmatic, widen their base, and Tunisians did not really develop strong interest in membership to political parties, as this figure suggests. Membership level in political parties remained around 2%. So very briefly, I would like to discuss about UJTT. It's a very powerful union. It has membership of around 10% of working age population. It was instrumental in catalyzing the revolution. However, after that, it acted as veto player. It was the only force, basically, that could counter Ennahda, and it used that. However, it was not within the political process. It did not join the formal political mechanisms. Rather, from outside, it tried to act as a veto player, engaged in strikes that was quite detrimental to ruling coalitions, accused of opposing structural reforms, and set red lines for public sector and privatization reforms, which many argue could lead to more inclusive economic development and could prevent citizen frustration with the political process. Furthermore, social democrat leftist parties, which in many European countries they traditionally ally with unions, this did not really happen in Tunisian case because the UJTT was too independent and too powerful, so the leftist parties could not benefit from UJTT's membership level. Another factor is the rise and demise of Nida Tunis, which is an authoritarian successor party that came after initial elections, tried to combine the networks of the RCD, and many thought that it could create a potential for a stable partisan competition between Ennahda and Nida Tunis. However, the party, despite establishing a consensus government in Ennahda, rapidly fell from power. It lost its popularity rapidly for multiple reasons. First, coalition was not supported from its base, and Nida Tunis was not as successful as RCD in activating clientele mechanisms that would respond to constituents' needs, constituents' immediate needs, and development projects, and parties' close association with business people, which relates to the weak financial law, hampered its public perception. So I'm not going to go any deeper about consequences of this because I believe our colleagues covered this issue very well. Eventually, the economic frustrations would continue, and this would create the path for nostalgia of the authoritarian rule and Kais Saied's power grab. But I will leave with a quote. I think this is a very important quote from one of our interviewees. These days, one can easily hear Tunisians pray for the soul of the late dictator Ben Ali in the Tunisian souk as a way of complaining about rising prices. So in a sense, it speaks to disillusionment of Tunisians with political class, even some of them yearning for good old days, even that would imply their voices not being heard, creating a path for an outsider to dismantle the democratization path. And you see that overall, 10 years in, a lot of parties lost their popularity here, and majority of Tunisians remain disillusioned with the political process. So we are happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much.